My name is Mark Harlan. I'm 32 years old and I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. I've spent most of my life being told I look like something you're supposed to cover up, something you apologize for. The red patches on my skin started when I was 15, angry streaks across my neck, behind my ears, down to my collarbone. It got worse in college, flaring when I was stressed or cold or just existing. People stared. Some asked if it hurt. Most didn't ask anything. They just stared a little too long and then looked away too fast. I got used to it. Not comfortable, just used to it. I learned to live with the version of myself that made people uncomfortable. I never expected the TEDx invitation. When it came through, I thought it was a mistake. They said they'd seen a piece I wrote online, something I didn't even share widely. Just a short essay about shame and silence and the things we carry on our skin. They said it moved them, that it was honest, that it felt needed. I stared at the email for 10 minutes before replying. I almost said no, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I knew what would happen once I said it. Once I stood on that stage, once the lights hit me, once the camera framed my face. I knew people wouldn't just hear my voice. They'd see the thing they'd always seen first. But I said yes. I wrote the talk over 3 weeks. I memorized it, then tore it apart and started over. I rehearsed in my apartment in parking lots in my head while waiting in line for coffee. I wore the same black shirt and tan blazer every time because it made the red on my skin stand out less. Or maybe more. I couldn't tell anymore. On the day of the event, I sat backstage and kept my hands in my lap. I didn't shake. I didn't breathe too deep. I just waited for my name to be called. The talk lasted 10 minutes. I don't remember delivering it, not really. I remember the heat, the silence when I paused, the click of someone's phone camera in the audience. When I stepped off stage, I didn't feel like I'd done something great. I felt like I'd survived. They told me it would go up on YouTube the following week. I nodded, said thank you, and left through the back exit. The video didn't go viral overnight. It crept, a few hundred views, then a few thousand, then a comment from someone I didn't know who said they felt seen, then another, and another. It kept building, slow and steady, until it passed 1 million views. Then 2. People were tagging friends. Teachers were using it in classrooms. Podcasts were quoting it. I stopped opening the notifications. I couldn't keep up. But one night, late, too late for anyone to be online, I clicked on the video again, just to remind myself that it was real. And there it was. Her name. I hadn't seen it in years, but it was hers. First name, last name, same spelling, same profile picture she used when we were together. I clicked the comment. She had written 6 words. I'm sorry, you proved me wrong. My chest tightened, not with anger, not even with pride, just pressure. The pressure of years folding into a single sentence. I sat still, staring at her words. My hand didn't move toward the keyboard. I didn't respond. I didn't even like the comment. I just let it sit there. Visible, public. Exactly where her laughter had once lived. Out loud, in front of others. She was the first person who ever told me no one would love me with a face like mine. She said it smiling. Said it while laughing in front of people I thought were my friends. I remember the air going still. I remember the way no one interrupted her. I remember standing there with heat rising in my neck and ears, not from shame, but from something quieter, something colder. The kind of pain that doesn't explode, it settles. It sinks in. I didn't argue that day. I didn't ask her to explain. I just walked out. I never answered her calls, never replied to her messages, and I never spoke about it out loud. Not until that stage, not until that talk. And now here she was, saying sorry, not in a whisper, but in a comment section, beneath, a video she never imagined I'd be the face of. She was part of the crowd now. One voice in a sea of others. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because the moment I saw that comment, I realized something. She was wrong. And the proof didn't need my reply. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a moment filled with rage or slammed doors or voices rising above reason. That would have been easier in some twisted way. Something explosive you could point to and say, that was the breaking point. No, When she said it, it was quiet, measured, almost casual, like she wasn't trying to hurt me, like she didn't even know she had the power to. That's what made it worse. She said it while laughing, in a room full of people, with a drink in her hand and confidence in her tone, like she was just stating a fact that the rest of them had already silently agreed upon. We were at a house party, not the kind you get wild at, but the kind where everyone pretends to be more interesting than they are, passing around the same tired stories and trying to outsmile each other. She was sitting on the arm of the couch, cross-legged, surrounded by people we both knew, people I thought knew me. Someone had made a comment about dating apps, about how all the filters in the world couldn't fix a bad first impression. She laughed, then glanced toward me, not directly but just enough, and said it. You know, some faces just aren't meant for love. You can't unsee certain things. It hung in the air for half a second, just long enough for it to register. Then she added the words that burned deepest. Mark knows what I mean. She didn't look at me when she said it. That would have required ownership. That would have made it real. Instead, she looked past me, past the discomfort, past the silence, and then she laughed again. The people around her didn't say anything. One person awkwardly chuckled. Another looked down at their drink. I just stood there still, while the room tried to move on like it hadn't happened. I didn't leave. Right away. That's the part I hate admitting. I stayed. I stood there another 10 minutes pretending to check my phone, pretending I hadn't heard what she said, pretending that my chest wasn't caving in with something far more dangerous than shame. Numbness. That cold vacuum where your worth used to be. I don't know if she noticed, I think she did. But she didn't come over. She didn't apologize. And no one else did either. When I finally walked out the door, the night was bitterly quiet. I remember the sound of my shoes on the pavement, the way the cold air hit my skin like it was trying to erase what had just happened. I got in my car and stared at the steering wheel for a long time before I turned the key. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was just tired. Not physically, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere under the bones, under the armor you build when you've been looked at too long and never seen. I replayed her words in my head for weeks after that. Not because I believed them, but because they echoed. They got under my skin the way laughter does when it's not meant for you. The way silence does when it should have been interrupted. I kept wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. If I'd twisted her tone, misunderstood her intent. But then I remembered how she didn't flinch, how she didn't apologize, and how no one stood up for me, not even the people who'd hugged me days before, who'd shared secrets with me, who had looked me in the eyes and said they respected me. That was the night I stopped needing validation, not because I felt strong, but because I knew it wouldn't come. She didn't call the next day, didn't text. Days passed, then weeks. I think she assumed I'd get over it, that we could slip back into whatever fragile version of closeness we'd built. But something broke in me that night. Not violently, not visibly, but cleanly. A quiet snap that separated who I'd been from who I was about to become. From that night on, I stopped adjusting my collar to hide the red marks. I stopped dodging reflections. I stopped waiting for someone to tell me I was enough. I wasn't enough for her, but that didn't mean I wasn't enough. She said it out loud, in front of others. But it never left me. And it never stopped echoing. Until I answered, it without saying a word. I didn't argue, not once. Not even when I had every reason to. Not even when the words sat on the edge of my tongue, fully formed and sharp enough to cut through the air between us. I let it go. I let her speak. I let the silence speak louder. And I let myself walk away without demanding an apology that would have only been offered for her own comfort. Because deep down, I knew something she didn't. You don't win by being louder. You don't win by fighting in spaces that were never built for you to be heard. You win by surviving in silence long enough to be undeniable. After that night, I didn't try to fix it. I didn't reach out to friends to explain what happened. I didn't defend myself to people who stayed quiet when they should have spoken. I didn't tell them how the sound of her voice had followed me out into the cold, how it echoed even when I was alone, how it settled behind my ribs and made everything I did for weeks afterward feel heavy. I just started changing things, quietly, deliberately. I deleted her number. Not in anger, just as a way to clear the space. I packed away the jacket she used to compliment because I couldn't wear it without hearing her laugh. I avoided the places we used to go. Not because I feared seeing her, but because I didn't want to see the version of myself I used to shrink into around her. I stopped shaving my face in the morning to check for symmetry. I stopped asking if the redness had faded. I let it show. I let it speak. At work, I started taking on projects no one else wanted. The background stuff. The things that didn't come with credit but built something. People noticed eventually, not right away, but they noticed. I spoke less in meetings, but when I did, they listened. I wasn't trying to be seen. I just refused to be hidden anymore. Every moment I chose not to argue became a brick in something larger. Every time I stayed silent was another inch of ground I gained. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't building toward a speech or a platform or a stage. I just kept moving in a direction that made sense to me, step by quiet step, and eventually that direction led me somewhere I hadn't expected. I wrote one short essay. That's all it was. Late at night, alone in my apartment with the windows open and the room filled with that kind of stillness that only arrives when you finally stop trying to prove anything. I wrote about being looked at, about being passed over, about being told by someone you trusted that love had a face and it wasn't yours. I didn't name her. I didn't name anyone. I just told the truth. I almost didn't post it. I hovered over the publish button for too long. Then I closed my laptop and walked away. When I came back an hour later, I hit the button without thinking. Then I logged off. That essay was read by someone who worked with TEDx. They reached out a month later, asked if I'd ever spoken publicly, said they were planning an event focused on stories about appearance, perception, and worth, said my piece had stayed with them, that it was honest in a way most people were afraid to be. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I replied. I said yes. Not to prove her wrong. Not to prove anyone wrong. But to prove that I was still here. That I hadn't disappeared under the weight of her words. That I could speak, now, not because I needed to, but because I finally had something worth saying. They asked if I wanted makeup. Just a little powder, the production assistant said. Nothing heavy. Just to even things out. She didn't say what she meant. She didn't have to. I knew what she saw when she looked at me through the lens. The texture, the color shift, the uneven map of my face that didn't align with the soft studio lights or the glossy expectations of a stage meant to make people comfortable. For a moment I hesitated. Out of habit. Out of that familiar instinct to smooth what can't be smoothed. To erase what never asked to be erased. But then I said no. Not with defiance, not with arrogance. Just no. Because if I said yes, even kindly, it would mean I believed it still needed fixing. I stood in the wings of the stage watching someone else speak before me. Their voice was calm, their story practiced. They smiled at all the right moments. Their image glowed under the lights like they'd always belonged there. I felt the heat rising under my collar, not from nerves, but from the memory of every time I'd turned my face slightly in photos to hide the worst angles. Every time I'd stared at my reflection under fluorescent lights and wondered how long it would take for someone to look past it. Every time I'd kept my head down just long enough to avoid a second glance. But now there was no hiding. No flattering angle. No filter. Only the truth of my face and the weight of my words. When they called my name, I walked out without looking at the audience. Not because I was afraid to see them, but because I wanted to feel the space before I claimed it. The silence. The breath between expectation and surprise. I stepped into the light, and I didn't blink. I let the warmth of the spotlight hit, my face in full. I didn't shift my posture. I didn't tuck my chin. I stood exactly as I was, marked, uneven, visible. And then I spoke. The first few words came like gravel, like something dragged from deep inside. But then they found their rhythm. And once they did, I forgot what I looked like. I forgot the shape of my mouth, the redness in my cheeks, the way my skin caught the light. All I could feel was the weight of the truth as it passed through me. I spoke about what it meant to be stared at without being seen. To be spoken to, with kindness but always from a distance. To be told in silent, practiced ways that presence was tolerated but never invited. I told them about her. Not by name, just the memory of her laugh, the sharpness of it, the way it landed and stayed lodged in my ribs. I told them how I never argued, how I walked away instead of trying to convince anyone that I was worth loving. Because I didn't want to win an argument, I wanted to be free of it. I told them how shame changes shape over time, how it stops being loud and becomes quiet and permanent, how it turns into silence you wear like a second skin. And then I told them what it felt like to outlive it. The silence in the room changed. It got heavier, not awkward, just still. Like they were holding something, not for me, but with me. They didn't know my face before that day, but now they did, and they weren't looking away. When the talk ended, I stood there for a second too long. I didn't plan to. I just didn't want to rush out of that moment. I wanted to stay in the space where I wasn't hiding, where I wasn't shrinking, where my face wasn't something to explain, just something to recognize. The applause was soft at first, then stronger, and still I didn't smile to perform. I let my mouth stay still. I let my expression stay real, because I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to be known. Later, backstage, someone said they'd never heard silence feel so full. I nodded, not because I needed their approval, but because I knew exactly what they meant. It wasn't the words that changed anything. It was the face that didn't hide when it delivered them. That day I didn't just speak. I stood still. I didn't just exist. I insisted. And for the first time, the world didn't look away. When I walked off the stage, I thought the hard part was over. I thought the weight I had been carrying had finally been put down, that the moment had passed and I could begin to forget it. But I didn't know how long moments like that could echo. I didn't know that once you stop hiding, the world doesn't stop looking, especially not when the camera doesn't flinch. They told me afterward that the footage looked powerful. That was the word they used, not inspiring. Or moving, but powerful. I wasn't sure how to take that. Power isn't what I thought I was giving. I thought I was telling the truth. I thought I was bleeding a little in public and hoping the cut was clean. But when the video went live, the reaction wasn't quiet. It wasn't polite applause and forgotten acknowledgments. It was loud. It was intimate. It was relentless in a way I never expected. The camera had caught everything. The tremble in my hands, the stillness in my jaw, the way the light sat on, the rawest parts of my skin, the way I didn't look down, and more than anything, it captured the one thing I hadn't rehearsed, how still I had become. That stillness, I learned, was what stayed with people. The lens didn't blink, and so neither did I. The comments started slowly. A few people tagging friends, a few paragraphs about what the talk meant to them. Then the stories came. Strangers, writing about how they'd spent their lives hiding behind makeup, behind silence, behind the fear of being stared at for the wrong reasons. They thanked me, but it didn't feel like I'd done something noble. It felt like I had finally let the world watch what I had always carried alone. And instead of turning away, they leaned in. 300,000 views turned into 500,000 in a week, then 1 million. My inbox filled with messages from people who said they'd shown the video to their kids, to their students, to their partners. I got emails from burn survivors, from teenagers with skin conditions, from men who had been told they were hard to look at and had believed it. They wrote as if they already knew me, as if I had been living their same story in a parallel lane, and the video had finally brought the roads together. And still, I didn't watch the video, not at first. I was afraid to see what they saw, not because I didn't trust the moment, but because I didn't know if I could sit with it from the outside. I had lived it from the inside. I knew what it felt like. But I didn't know what I looked like while telling it. I didn't know if the pain was visible. I didn't know if I came across as strong or broken or something in between. I didn't know if I would recognize myself. But one night, after reading a message from someone who said the talk stopped them from quitting something they'd once loved, I clicked on the video. I let it play all the way through. No skipping. No pausing. I sat with myself in real time, and what I saw wasn't what I feared. I didn't see a man crumbling. I didn't see the patchwork of redness or the uneven lines. I didn't see weakness. I saw presence. I saw someone who had nothing left to hide and everything left to offer. I saw my face, not softened, not corrected, not filtered. Just real. The camera had caught the one thing no mirror ever had. What it looked like when I finally believed I had the right to take up space. I watched the way I breathed through the hard parts, the way I didn't rush, the way the silence between sentences felt earned. I saw people in the audience nodding. One person had tears in their eyes. I hadn't noticed that from the stage. But the camera did. It caught the moment before I spoke. It caught the weight I exhaled when I finished. It caught everything I used to think I needed to cover. And it made it impossible to look away. I didn't cry when the video ended. I just sat still, the same way I had stood still that day. And I thought, maybe for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of being seen. Not because I changed, not because I got prettier or stronger or better, but because I stopped waiting for the world to give me permission. The camera didn't look away, and neither did I. The strange thing about the internet is how easily people forget it's a mirror. It doesn't just reflect who we are, it reflects who we've been, what we've said, what we've allowed to slip from our mouths thinking the world wouldn't remember. It archives cruelty as casually as kindness. And the comment section? It never closes. It keeps receipts in public view long after the apologies come in private. That's the part no one prepares you for when something you've made reaches millions. You don't just get the praise. You get the full echo, past, present, and everything you thought you'd buried. It had been weeks since the video passed the 1 million mark when I saw her comment. Not a message, not a DM. A comment, right there, under the post, sitting between. A woman thanking me for helping her son feel seen and a man saying he'd watched the talk 5 times and cried every time. Her name looked smaller now. I almost didn't recognize it. But the profile photo hadn't changed. That same curated perfect image of the person who once looked at me across a crowded room and said I was the kind of face no one could love. She hadn't deleted it. That surprised me. It had been up for a few hours already. I tapped on her name, half expecting to find a blank page or a locked profile, but it was all still there. Photos, posts, memories. Nothing scrubbed. I went back to the comment. It was short. Just an apology. No explanation. No defense. Just 6 words. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Mark. And in that moment, the world didn't change. The lights didn't shift. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Like a page had been turned without effort. Like a story that had carried too much weight for too long had finally landed on its last line. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it. I didn't block her. I let it sit there, where anyone could see it. Because she had said what she said out loud, and now she had to live with it out loud. That was the irony. The brutal, poetic symmetry of it all. She once used my face as a punchline. Now she was beneath it, trying to make amends in the shadow of something she never thought would belong to me. And still, I didn't hate her. I didn't carry bitterness. I didn't wish her pain. I just didn't carry her at all anymore. I thought about messaging her once. Not to gloat. Just to tell her that I'm okay. That I didn't disappear after that night. That I didn't become smaller. I became more. That the silence I gave her back then wasn't weakness, it was space. Space to grow. Space to become someone who no longer waits to be accepted by people who can't see beyond their own fear of difference. But I didn't message her. because I realized she already knows. She saw it. She heard it. She watched every second of the talk and still felt compelled to type those 6 words. That was enough. That was more than enough. The version of me she laughed at didn't disappear. He grew. He stood on a stage. He looked into a lens that didn't blink. He told the truth not to make anyone pay, but to set himself free. And in doing so, he gave others permission to do the same. Now my story lives on a page she can't erase, a screen she can't turn off, a comment section that will remember her more honestly than any apology ever could. And maybe that's what justice looks like. Not revenge, not public humiliation, but presence. Being here. Being real. Being everything they said you could never be, and letting them watch not because you need them to, but because now they can't look away.